She was caring, she was funny, she was clever. In her last hours, she was faced with brutality and terror, alone with someone intent on doing her harm. The thought of it is unbearable. I'm haunted by the horror of it. Just some of the words from Sarah Everard's mum today. She added, "In the evenings, at the time she was abducted, I let out a silent scream. Don't get in the car, Sarah. Don't believe him. Run." Addressing the man that took away their daughter in the most brutal of ways.
Sat in handcuffs and asking me what I know her, so you must have something to say that I know her.
Today, the web of lies PC Wayne Couzens told when he was first arrested was played to court. He claimed a gang had made him kidnap a woman and hand her over.
I don't know if my family's going to be alright still, but they threatened to take my family away from me.
But eventually the evidence was overwhelming, and in July he pleaded guilty to the kidnap, rape and murder of Sarah Everard. But only today was the true horror of what he did to her made public. On the evening of the 3rd of March, Sarah Everard was caught on CCTV, leaving her friend's house in South London to begin her 40-minute walk back to her house. Nearby, PC Wayne Couzens is seen driving in a circular route, consistent, the prosecution said, with him hunting for a lone victim.
Yes, it is.
Earlier that day, he's pictured picking up the hire car he's in. The court heard he'd recently been enforcing COVID regulations for the Metropolitan Police, giving him the terminology to use. And the fact that Sarah was out at the height of lockdown made her more likely to submit to an accusation that she'd breached the COVID rules. He eventually came across her and pulled up on the pavement in front. PC Wayne Couzens was caught on camera showing something to Sarah Everard, presumed to be his warrant card. A passerby says they saw what they thought was an undercover officer arresting a woman who they presumed had done something wrong. They were in fact witnessing Sarah Everard's kidnap by a serving police officer. The court then heard the chilling details of what happened next. Sarah Everard was put in the back of his hire car with her hands cuffed behind her back, an act which would have meant she wouldn't have even been able to undo her seatbelt. The prosecutor then surmised that at some point in her 80-mile journey, which led to her rape and murder, she would have realised her fate. Couzens then drove from South London to Dover, where he transferred them to his family car, a black Seat, and drove her to a rural area, where he raped her. Police believe by 2:30 in the morning he'd murdered Sarah. Her sister today describing seeing his casual demeanour as he bought coffee the next morning as shocking and disgusting. 2 days later, he was caught on CCTV buying petrol, which he used to burn Sarah's body. Her family said burning her was a final insult, denying them the chance to kiss her goodbye. Around an hour after he burned her body, Wayne Couzens made this cheery phone call to his vet.
Yeah, I was wondering if I could book my dog in for the vet so I can have a discussion about issues, please.
He then went to his local B&Q to buy builder's bags, which he used to move Sarah's burnt body to the pond where it was later found. In court today, Couzens sat throughout with his head down, unwilling to make eye contact. But Sarah Everard's sister and father demanded he looked at them when they emotionally read out how what he'd done had impacted them. Her sister telling him, "The last moments of Sarah's life play on my mind constantly. You've taken from me the most precious person, and I can never get her back." Tomorrow the judge will sentence the former PC, something Sarah Everard's dad says can't ever compare to the pain and torture he's inflicted on them.
Well, earlier I spoke to Caroline Noakes, chair of the Women and Equality Select Committee, and I began by asking her whether it should be up to women to ensure their own safety.
We have to get away from telling women to follow rules. We have to make sure that we tackle the cultures that are underpinning male violence against women, and that can only be done with schools, with the health service, making sure that we send a really clear message that women are not at fault. This is about a cultural problem. And we really have to address it, not just through tough sentencing for serial offenders, but also looking at those who have perpetrated lower level crimes and making sure that they're treated seriously. Because it looks very much as if there is a conveyor belt to more serious crime. And we have to make sure that things like public sexual harassment are made a specific crime.
This has been a problem for so long, though, and it does seem that it's taking an incredibly long time to get anything serious done about it.
I think this is cultural. For too long, women have lived their lives in fear, and they have been the ones who have taken avoiding measures. We all walk home with our keys in our hand. We stick to well-lit areas. That isn't enough. We have to make sure that in schools we're teaching things about consent robustly enough. We have to make sure that we're treating public sexual harassment as a crime, that we are prosecuting offenders, that you see Justice Department and the Home Office working hand in hand so that police forces, when they investigate these crimes, do so with real vigour, that the CPS prosecute them with determination, and that when people are sentenced, we use tools like the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill to make sure that there are stiffer sentences. But it's still a long way to go and much more to be done.
Is the government actually taking this problem seriously enough?
Look, this is a national emergency. We've seen 105 women killed already this year. 1 every 3 days will be killed in 2021. And we've seen a new policing lead, a national policing lead, Maggie Blythe. We need to see all police forces treating violence against women and girls with the same level of seriousness. We need to see the new Domestic Abuse Act enforced absolutely rigorously. And we need to see further steps to address the cultures that underpin male violence. So we need to see the new online harms legislation used to crack down on the access to the most violent and disturbing pornography that we know too many children are seeing.
The Criminal Prosecution Service is blaming funding. Isn't that the root of it?
Well, I think there is a lot at the root of this. I don't shy away from the fact that we need to see the CPS working hand in glove with the police service to make sure that we see investigations, we see prosecutions, and indeed when things come to court, we see initiatives like the independent sexual violence advisors working very closely with victims to make sure that they're supported through the process. But look, I think these are all matters that Dominic Raab should be addressing, and I want to see real energy from him next week, setting out how he's going to achieve this.
The terrifying thing about this particular case is it did involve a policeman. Isn't that a major worry?
Well, it's absolutely horrific. Crimes like upskirting, like indecent exposure, like public sexual harassment, these are all a pathway to more serious offending. And it's about time they were treated with the severity that the impact that they have on their victims.
Caroline Noakes, thank you very much for joining us. I have also been speaking with Sue Fish, a former police chief constable. I began by asking her whether there was a problem within the police.
Police officers don't get it. Most police officers are white, male, ostensibly straight, able-bodied. They don't get what it's like to be a victim, and they don't have most don't have a lived experience of being a woman. They may have been a victim of property crime, they may have been assaulted on duty, but actually the fear and too often, sadly, the reality of violence against women at the hands of men is just something that the levels of empathy and insight simply aren't there. And I think the other bit is also in terms of the investigations, actually maintaining that level of interest, commitment against an incredibly busy schedule of jobs that police officers need to do. Yet for that victim, it's probably the most significant thing that's either ever happened to them or is likely to be one of the most significant things.
You yourself were assaulted when in the police, and I'm wondering whether you think the way you were dealt with would be the way you'd be dealt with now.
I didn't report the first matter. I felt too humiliated and embarrassed and felt that someone would say it was my fault and what was I doing and things like that. The second time I did report it, and to my fantastic boss at the time, and it was dealt with incredibly well, sensitively and supportively from my perspective, and gave me the sort of outcomes that I needed and wanted. Sadly, I don't think I can say that for other colleagues who've experienced abuse at the hands of police officers, let alone members of the public.
You yourself became a boss within the police, a chief constable. To what extent were you able to practice what you wanted to see when it came to the treatment of women in your force?
Well, we did a number of things. We did some really strong work around police officers who were sexually predatory ahead of the national curve. And we also were the first force in the country to introduce misogyny as a hate crime. And I think that is such a vital first step. It's not the solution, but it's a first step in helping both officers and indeed women and indeed men who behave in that sort of way, that this isn't acceptable and that the police will take it seriously, sensitively and appropriately.
What effect do you think having a woman at the top of the force, as you were, has on the policing below you?
I'd like to hope it makes a difference having a woman at the helm. I think what's really important is you have clear leadership. You have good, consistent leadership, and particularly on subjects like this.
Do you think, finally, that there should be an institutional response to what we've discovered about the murderer of Sarah Everard?
Yes, I do. I think there should be a really deep response, because it's easy to say, oh, this is an extreme example, and therefore dismiss it or say everyone else isn't like that. No, everyone else, thankfully, isn't like that. But too many are predatory in terms of behaviour, abusive in terms of behaviour, both with members of the public and particularly vulnerable victims, but also with their colleagues. Or they stand by and they don't identify, they don't intervene, and they don't acknowledge what they're actually seeing before them. So I think that needs to fundamentally change.
Sue Fish, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you.